Babies. They are pretty helpless, and we can't just ask them how they acquire language because, well, they haven't yet acquired language. So how do we know so much about the first stages of development? Hello, my name is Christopher, and we are back to Ling, Linguistics for the layperson. In today's video, we are indeed discussing experiments on infants, but don't worry, they're not so sinister. Instead, we're taking a look at some of the creative ways in which linguists and child psychologists conduct tests on non-speaking and non-comprehending babies. So, for some background information, it's important to keep in mind that in order for children to acquire language, they must first conquer the basics. No, I'm not referring to how meaning arises from words, or how words are arranged in a sentence, or how the words themselves are constructed. They'll get to that eventually. No, I mean the real basics. Perceiving, identifying, and ultimately articulating the sounds or phonemes of their language. You see, before you ever said your first word, your brain was hard at work processing all the new auditory input you were experiencing. It had to decode the long strings of sounds into its individual words and syllables, only before figuring out how to combine those same sounds into new syllables and words. And we know all this thanks in large part to clever techniques researchers use to study first language acquisition, two of which we'll discuss today. So, first off is something called high-amplitude sucking, or HAS, which is performed on babies up to 6 months. During the experiment, the infant is provided with a special dummy or pacifier that connects to a sound-generating system. When sucked, the pacifier makes a sound, which the baby quickly discovers and begins sucking more frequently, interested to hear the sound. However, after some time, the infant grows bored of hearing the same sound repeated and the sucking rate slows down. At this point, the technician adjusts the sound. If the sucking accelerates again, we can infer that the baby recognizes a new and therefore interesting sound. If not, we reason that the baby could not tell the difference between them. It's that simple. The second but related technique is called conditioned head turn procedure, or HT, and is used on infants between 6 and 18 months. The experiment involves two phases, conditioning and testing. Basically, the infant sits on a caretaker's lap and watches a screen that displays some sort of visual reinforcement alongside sound from an external speaker. During the conditioning phase, the baby learns to associate a change in the sound with the visual, which occurs simultaneously. Next, the technician adjusts the display such that the visual occurs shortly after the sound change. At this point, the infant will begin anticipating the visual before it's activated. I hope that makes sense. And so, if during the testing phase the baby looks at the display right after the sound change, we can infer that the baby could perceive a difference between them. If not, the infant couldn't. It's also quite simple. Nevertheless, these methodologies have produced some remarkable insights over the last half century. In particular, I wish to highlight a 1986 study which found that babies can actually hear speech in the womb. To test this, the researchers had mothers read a recently cancelled Dr. Seuss story out loud during the final 6 weeks of pregnancy. There was also a control group, of course. And when the infants were played a recording of the same story, among others, within a week of birth, the experimental group modified its sucking rate while the control group demonstrated no change. From this, the researchers deduced that the babies who had already been exposed to the story in the womb recognized the speech as distinct from the rest and thus a stimulus. By comparison, the control group heard completely unfamiliar sounds throughout the experiment. And so, it is through ingenious experiments on infants like high-amplitude sucking and conditioned head-turn procedure that we know so much about first language acquisition in even our earliest stages. Perhaps babies are more aware of what's going on than we realize. Alright, that's all for today. Please give this video a like if you learned something, and let me know in the comments section what you think of these techniques. Are you also impressed by the creativity of researchers? Did you participate in any studies as a child? What would you like for me to discuss next? Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video. My sources are in the description, and as always, thank you so much for watching.